Hello everyone, my name is Sunny and I'm in the learning process of uipath certification, and welcome to my channel. And today we are working with variable and data type, and it is a basic and very important chapter of certification. If we go to the link of advanced RPA Developer Certification Training, you can find this chapter right down there: variable type, data type and control flow. Actually this chapter is divided into two parts: variable, data type and control flow. But today we will be working with variables only and the data types. Mm, Let me open the chapter and we will see what's inside the chapter. Alright. So to learn this chapter, one need to be understand the basic knowledge of programming, like the stuff, what are variables and what are data types, like what is string value, what is integer value, what is boolean, all this basic stuff. Alright. Okay, so as I told you, this chapter is divided into two parts: uh, variable argument data type and a control flow. So we will be working with variables today. Okay, let's open the variable part. Okay, so this is the definition of variable. We will check, and there are some properties. This is name, type, default value and scope, and how we can create variables. There are three different ways we can create variables: from variable panel, from designer panel, from property panel. We will see this in uipath studio, and this is a video about the creating variables. This is very helpful, guys. And this is the script of the video. You can check, and there are some documentations about variables. We will check the documentation part as well. The documentation is about managing variable and the type of variables, and good case practice of creating variables. And I explain you what are the good case practice of creating variables. We need to check the naming conventions when we creating the variables. Our variable naming is very meaningful. Okay, it's always meaningful that the other developers can understand, and our naming conventions is always in a camel case. All right, and we will discuss some scope part as well. And later on the chapter about the arguments, I might not discuss argument today. Maybe I'll make one full video of arguments in the next chapter with the generic value, because generic value variable type is very important uh, for examination and for interviews. All right, let's jump into studio. Okay, before jumping to studio, let's understand what are variables and what are values. All right, let's say you want to store email address. Okay, you want to store email address and your first name or your last name. You have a form, right? A UI form, or your email ID form, let's say, right? When you're creating an email, so you need to put the values, right? Your name, your last name, your first name. So these are the values. Okay, and to store the values we need to create a variable. Okay, and variable, when we're creating the variables, we need to give them a meaningful name. All right, let's say you want to store email address, and what is the meaningful name of variable? Email ID or maybe email address. All right, so this is our name, variable name, and this is our value. All right, sunny@gmail. Your email ID is your value. And if you want to store the names, your first name like Sunny and your last name Bimpal, and it is like any name you want to store. All right, so this is a name and this is a value. You want to store any, you want to store names. The names can be our values. If you want to store mobile number and it is of integer type, the numbers are always integer type, so mobile number is your variable name. It is a meaningful name. Like you want to store mobile number, so mobile number or phone number is a meaningful name, right? And your value should be your number. This is about the boolean value, true and false. We will discuss this part as well. Okay, so I hope this gives you a better understanding what is value and what is variable. This is what they talk about in the introduction part. Okay, so the variable are configured through their properties, and you can set them in variable panel. Okay, variables have some properties, guys. Name, I already told you, meaningful name. This is our variable. This is one of the type of, sorry, this is one of the properties of variable name, right? When we go to, okay, I make a new workflow for this. Working with variable, working with variable here. Okay, all right. Okay, when we create a variable, so first I tell you this is our activity panel, this is our project panel, this is our activity panel, and this is a designer panel where we work, where we design our process. All right, where we design our workflow. And this is the property panel, and this is the main where you create variable. This is a variable panel. You can see in a variable panel, we can see the variable properties, the name and the variable type and the scope and the default value. All right, if we see, if we come down to this part, so we can create variables in a three different ways, guys. Inside the variable panel, over here inside the designer panel, and inside the property panel. So these are the three different ways we can create variables. And guys, this is very important, and they can ask you in interview, or they might ask you in certification as well, what are the ways we can create variables, and they might give you options, multiple choice options, so you have to select them. So there are three main ways you can create variables. In a variable panel, here is our variable panel, and designer panel, here is our designer panel, and here is our property panel. All right, okay, when we create variable through variable panel, we always just click on the design panel, and we just open the variable panel and just create. You don't need to do anything, just click on that, click on create variable, and create any meaningful variable. Let's say you want to store email addresses. All right, so just your variable name should be email address. Okay, email address. Okay, and we know that the email is of string type. Okay, it can't be your number type, right, or integer type or any other type. So this is a type, variable types. We can store different types here. If you want to store multiple values, we can use array. You can store data tables. There are some .NET types as well. When we open the browse for type, there are some .NET types. For example, if you want to work with date and time, this is a .NET type, right? Date and time. If you want to work and if you want to store any value, let's say you want to store any date or you want to store any time, you can always use date and time. I think not this one. See this one, system.datetime. So this is the value. So there are some different data types, data table types, okay, and there are many .NET types. Okay, so this is the scope, guys. This is the scope we are working in, working with variables. Okay, and the default value, if you want to give any default value, you can do so, or you can leave it blank. Default value is useful when you don't want your values uh, stored, when you don't want your values empty. All right, so you can give any default value. Let's say you can give a default value now, uipath at the rate yahoo.com, right? So it is useful when you don't have any value for your email address. So so when you store the email address in, like when you do any operation inside the designer panel, so this value would store because it is a default value, right? A default value I will explain you when we working with boolean. Data type I will explain you in that time, because you can get it would be easy to understand default value with a boolean variable. All right. So this is one way we can store value in variable panel. See, this is one way, and the next one is the designer panel. This is a designer panel. To work with designer panel, we always select one activity. Okay, to create a variables, we need to select one activity. You can either select assign activity, and you can create your variable first by pressing Control K. Okay, let's say you want to store first name. Okay, first name. All right. By pressing Control K, you can set your variable. You can create your variable inside the designer panel. This is very important, guys. If you want to store variable in designer panel, just press Control K. Okay, and you want to store the value. We know that the name is always a string variable, string type, sorry, and string value is always be in quotations. Let's say you want to store your name, Sam, right? That's it. Let me check if our name has been stored or not. We can check the default value as well. See, this is our default value. We didn't assign anything inside the variable inside the designer panel for the email address. Okay, we can also check the email address as well. So this is our default value. You guys can see this is our default value. Okay, let's say first name plus email address. Cool. Let's check for values have been stored or not. See, Sam and uipath. Okay, let me give space inside the. This is cool. Let me run the file again. Alright, guys. So this is Sam, and this is our default value, guys. uipath@yahoo.com, and this is our name. So this is the second way we can create variables inside the designer panel. And what is the third way? From the property panel. Okay. To understand the property panel, how we can create variable in property panel, we need an activity input dialog box. Okay, what is your name? Let's say what is your name? Okay, so these are the properties of input dialog box. Okay, these are some properties, and we can create variable to store the output value. We can create a variable. Okay, let's say let me run the file. What is your name? Right, you can write Sunny. So uh, we need to store this value, Sunny. We need to store that name. Okay, we need to store that name. For that, we need to create a variable. Remember, we can create values inside the variable. So for that, we need to create variables. So in property panel, so our value is not stored in anywhere. Okay, so value is not stored anywhere. So we need to create a variable to display the output, to show the output, to show the result. So we can store in a property panel. Cool. When we open up, the expression editor will open, and the same way like I show you in the designer panel, Control K, set variable appears, and you can write down meaningful name, output name. Let's say output name. Alright, so you can see in a variable panel your variable has been created. Cool. Let's check the output value as well. Let's check the output value as well. What is our output value? Output name. Let me run the file. Mandy. Let's type the Mandy. Cool. See, Sam, uipath, and Mandy has been stored. So guys, these are the three ways we can create variables. Okay, and this is a video you guys can check. This is very useful. And let's quickly check the naming part as well. Good case practice. Okay, when we create variables, I already told you use clear and meaningful names so the other developers can understand. Okay, like so we for email address we can't give name, right, like first name or anything, like we can't give mobile number to email address, right? This gives us no meaning, right? So we always uh, gives us meaningful name for our variables. Alright guys, and the next part is the naming conventions. It is always be a camel case. I already told you guys it is always be a camel case. What is camel case? To understand the camel case, let's say you want to store last name. Okay, how you can write in camel case last. This is the first letter. First letter should always be small when we type camel case. So we want to store last name, right? In a camel case, at the second letter we write the first word of the letter is capital. Okay, name. That is camel case. Alright guys, so always write camel case. Always write in camel case. Um, that's it about the good practice, and always check the scope of your variable. Okay, it is very important. So they might ask you what is the best practice. Okay, I told you about the naming, and just tell the naming conventions and the scope. Okay, in a scope your variable, do not create unnecessarily global variables. All right, so your scope of your variable is inside the local, inside the in scope in which they are used, making multiple variables unnecessary. Okay, do not create unnecessarily, multiple variables. Let's say uh, you want to store first name again. Okay, I give you example. Let's drop one more sequence. Okay, drop one more sequence, and let's drop one more activity, assign activity, and create a variable inside that. Let's create, why just change the name equals 1. Okay, just type your, let's change the scope for that. Sorry, just create the variable here, first name. Sorry, let's do first name. Okay, and change, yeah. So you can see, oh sorry, let's change the variable name, guys. FIRST. I'm going to write the same name and inside the different scope, but it gives you warning as well. It's already inside the different sequence. Okay, alright, doesn't matter. So it is not appearing. It's appearing actually. Okay, alright. So this is, guys, this is bad practice. Okay, don't do that. This is bad practice. And see, this is bad practice. When we click on the outside the scope, you can't see the first name of, you can't see the sequence one variable here because this is inside the local scope. When we click, we can see it gives us a warning as well. So this is bad practice. Do not use the same variable name. Okay, and avoid using multiple, avoid using variables uh, at global level. All right, unnecessary variables. Let me tell you the sequence. So guys, this is all about variables. Okay, let's quickly see the documentation part. Okay, when we check the documentation part, we have two documentation about the variables, managing variables. Let's go to the link. We already seen the naming conventions. Okay, and we already seen the variables, how we create designer panel, how we create in a property panel. We have seen that one. See, yep. And from variable panel, we have seen how to create variables from variable panel. And removing variables, guys. How we can remove variables? Let's say I'm not using, let's say I'm not using, let me delete the first name activity. Let me delete that one. I'm not using that one, but we still have that variable inside the variable panel. We still have that name, first name. Okay. You can remove that unused variables where you don't have any values. Okay, you are not using that variable, right? You can remove. So by just clicking this one, remove unused variable. When you click that one, you see we are using that one. Okay, let me delete from message box as well. Because we are using is not deleting, that's why it is not deleting, because we are using the first name here. Let me delete now. Okay, so we are not using it anymore. Let me remove it. Click and just check. See, it is removed. Our unused variables has been removed by just pressing this button. It is very useful and very helpful when we have unused variables. Okay, and there are other ways as well to remove variables. Let's say you want to remove email address. Just click on email address and just press delete. If you want to delete output name, just click on that and right click and delete it. Cool. Alright, so in that way we can remove variables. Browse for .NET variable types, we already seen that. That is all about managing variables. In the type of variables, there are different types of variable. Text variable, it's a string variables, and true and false is a boolean. Numbers like int variable and array variables, we will work when more on array variables when we work with data manipulation. And date and time variable, when we work with date and times, we will see this part as well when we work with date and time. And for the data table, when we work in Excel part, we will see that one. And generic value variable, guys, this is very important chapter. This is very important part. Then I work with arguments. Before we work with arguments, I will explain you about the generic variable. Let me open the generic variable documentation. We will see the functions like how we can use the generic variable. This is very confusing actually. The main purpose of generic variable is when we are not sure about the output of the variable. Okay, when we are not sure our output is of string type or our output is of integer type. In that case, we will use a generic variable. Okay, but when we are using generic variable, we need to be very careful uh, because when we're working with generic variable, it gives you a different outputs. Okay, we will see the workflow, one workflow with generic variable, and I'll explain you how we can work with string by using a generic variable and how we can work with integers when we are using a generic variable. All right. This is all about generic variable. Um, I think that's it. That's all about variables, guys. In the next chapter, we will see arguments. I hope this is helpful. Thank you so much for watching my video. Goodbye. Have a good evening. Thank you so much.